The air in the modest chapel was thick with the scent of wilting lilies and quiet grief. Liam Sterling stood beside the simple pine casket, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He felt hollowed out, a vessel scoured clean by loss. His father, a man of quiet dignity and unwavering routine, was gone. The suit Liam wore was his only one, purchased years ago for a wedding. It felt foreign and stiff against his skin, a costume for a role he never wanted to play. Across the aisle, his wife, Chloe, checked her diamond-encrusted watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of boredom and irritation. Beside her, her mother, Eleanor, fanned herself with a funeral program, her gaze sweeping over the small gathering with undisguised contempt. The peeling paint on the chapel walls and the threadbare carpet seemed to offend her on a personal level. Liam felt their judgment like a physical weight. For the 5 years of his marriage, it had been a constant, pressing force, shaping his life into something small and apologetic. Chloe had always despised his family's simplicity. She called his father a glorified handyman, a man who had worked his entire life as a facilities manager for a downtown office building. She saw no honor in his labor, only a lack of ambition. Now, even in death, they could not grant him a moment's peace. "Is this almost over?" Chloe whispered, her voice a sharp hiss that cut through the solemn quiet. "I have a facial booked at 4. They charge a cancellation fee." Liam didn't turn. He kept his eyes fixed on the casket, a silent plea for strength. He could feel the other mourners, his father's few friends from the Union Hall and the neighborhood, shifting uncomfortably. They had all witnessed Chloe's casual cruelty over the years. Eleanor leaned in, her voice dripping with venomous sympathy. "Honestly, Liam, a pine box? Your father deserved better. But I suppose one does what one can with their means." The words were designed to sound kind, but landed like stones. It was their specialty. Insults wrapped in the guise of social grace. Finally, the service concluded. As people began to file out, offering Liam quiet condolences, a tall, impeccably dressed man approached him. It was Mr. Harrison, his father's lawyer and oldest friend. "Liam," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Your father was the best man I ever knew. He was so proud of you." Liam could only nod, his throat tight with unshed tears. Harrison then pressed a simple, thick, manila envelope into his hand. It was sealed with wax but had no markings. "He asked me to give this to you. He said it contained his true legacy. His instructions were clear: open it only when you feel you are truly ready." Liam stared at the plain envelope. It felt strangely heavy, imbued with a significance he couldn't yet comprehend. It was a final mystery from a man he thought he knew completely. He clutched it in his hand just as Chloe and Eleanor swept towards him, their patience completely evaporated. "All right, Liam, that's enough," Chloe declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We've paid our respects. It's time to go." She didn't look at him, her eyes already scanning the parking lot, as if mentally hailing a cab to escape the suffocating modesty of the scene. But then she stopped. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was a look Liam knew well. It was the look she got right before she delivered a killing blow. "Actually," she said, her voice suddenly loud enough for the remaining guests to hear, "there's one last piece of business to attend to." From her designer handbag she produced a crisp set of documents. She fanned them out like a winning hand of cards. "What is that?" Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. He already knew. The cold dread pooling in his stomach was a familiar sensation. "It's our divorce. she announced, her smile widening as gasps rippled through the small crowd. "I had them delivered here. I thought it was fitting, a day for endings after all." She thrust the papers against his chest. He didn't take them, so they fluttered to the ground, landing near the worn toes of his shoes. "You can't be serious, Chloe," he breathed, the world tilting on its axis. "Not here. Not now." "Oh, I am perfectly serious," she sneered, stepping closer. "I have wasted 5 years of my life tied to a pathetic, unambitious failure. I have waited on you, pretended to care about your sad little life, and for what? To end up in a place like this?" She gestured around the humble chapel. "This is your future, Liam. This is all you will ever be, and I refuse to be dragged down with you." Eleanor stood behind her, a proud general watching her daughter win a decisive battle. Her smirk was a mirror of Chloe's. Tears pricked at Liam's eyes, hot and shameful. The humiliation was a physical pain, sharp and absolute. He was being unmade in front of the very people who had watched him grow up. Chloe then reached into her purse again. She pulled out a thick wad of cash held together by a gold money clip. With a flick of her wrist, she threw it at his feet. The bills scattered across the dusty floor around the divorce papers. "Here!" she spat, her voice ringing with finality. "A severance package. Consider it the last act of charity you will ever receive from me. Now you can't say I left you with nothing." She turned on her heel, her expensive shoes clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. "Come, Mother, I need a glass of champagne. I feel positively contaminated." As they walked away, a gust of wind from the open chapel door stirred the money at Liam's feet. The bills danced around the pine casket, a vulgar confetti at his life's funeral. He stood frozen, the manila envelope still clutched in one hand, his world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The grief for his father was now buried under an avalanche of shame and betrayal. He was no longer just a son in mourning. He was a spectacle, a cautionary tale, a joke. And in the chilling silence of the empty chapel, he felt a coldness that had nothing to do with death. It was the chilling realization of being utterly and completely alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of grey. Liam moved into a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of the city. He packed his old life into a few cardboard boxes, leaving behind the ghost of a marriage that had been a lie. The beautiful home they had shared, the one Chloe always complained was too small, had been in her name. She had made sure of that. Within a day of the funeral, the locks were changed. His job, a position in the logistics department of a large corporation called Apex Global, became his only anchor. It was simple, methodical work, tracking shipments, managing inventory databases, ensuring supply chains ran smoothly. It was the very job Chloe had used as a weapon against him for years. A glorified clerk, she would call him in front of her friends, her voice laced with pity and disdain. He plays with spreadsheets while other men build empires. He never told her that he had chosen the job precisely for its lack of glamour. He never told her that the quiet satisfaction of solving a complex logistical problem brought him a sense of peace. To her, his contentment was just another symptom of his failure. She had been obsessed with the world of wealth and power, a world she felt was her birthright. Her days were a whirlwind of high-end shopping, exclusive lunches, and charity galas, where the primary charity was showcasing one's own status. She spent his modest salary with a ferocity that left them perpetually on the edge of debt, yet she framed it as his inability to provide. "If you were a real man," she'd say, gesturing to her latest designer purchase, "this would be a drop in the bucket." Now free from him, she was thriving. Her social media was a curated monument to her new life. Pictures of her clinking champagne glasses on rooftop bars, posing on yachts with people whose teeth were as white as their morals were grey. And then there was Mark. His name appeared just 2 weeks after the divorce. Mark, with his slicked-back hair, expensive suit, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The captions were cloyingly sweet. "Finally found a man who understands my worth. Leveling up in every way." Liam learned through the digital grapevine that Mark was a senior executive at Apex Global, the very same company where he worked. A rising star, according to Chloe's posts. He was everything Liam was not, ambitious, ruthless, and celebrated for it. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She had left her clerk husband for a man who worked just a few floors above him in the same building. It felt like a calculated final insult. Chloe made sure he knew it. She would send him taunting text messages with pictures of her and Mark. "This is what a real power couple looks like," one read, attached to a photo of them at a black tie event. Another time, a picture of a new sports car. "Mark got a promotion, he buys me gifts, you just gave me headaches." Liam never responded. He simply deleted the messages and tried to focus on the quiet order of his spreadsheets. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the periphery while Chloe danced in the spotlight. One evening, sitting in his silent apartment with a microwave dinner, he found himself staring at the manila envelope from Mr. Harrison. It had sat on his small kitchen counter for weeks, a silent, unopened legacy. He had been too broken to face it, too afraid of what it might contain. More debts, more bad news. His father was a simple man. What true legacy could there be beyond his well-worn tools and his pension? But that night, something shifted. The constant barrage of Chloe's taunts and the crushing weight of his own inertia finally sparked something within him. It was not anger. Not yet. It was a flicker of desperate curiosity. With trembling hands, he picked up the envelope. The wax seal, stamped with a simple S, cracked under his thumb. Inside there was no lengthy letter, no sentimental explanation. There was only a single, heavy, ornate brass key and a small, stiff card. On the card was a handwritten address and a name, Harrison Holdings, 14th floor, the Sterling Tower. Below it, a simple instruction, ask for Mr. Harrison. The Sterling Tower. Liam's blood ran cold. It was one of the most iconic skyscrapers in the city, a gleaming monument of glass and steel that housed the headquarters of dozens of global firms. His father had worked as a facilities manager in a different, much older building across town. What connection could he possibly have to this place? He looked at the key again. It was old-fashioned, intricate. It looked like it belonged to a forgotten treasure chest, not a modern office building. The next day, Liam called in sick to work for the first time in his life. The lie felt strange on his tongue. He put on his best shirt, the only one that wasn't frayed at the collar, and took the subway downtown. Standing before the monolithic Sterling Tower, he felt impossibly small. Men and women in sharp, tailored suits swept past him, exuding an aura of importance and purpose. He felt like an imposter. He nearly turned back a dozen times, but the weight of the key in his pocket and the memory of Chloe's sneering face pushed him forward. He had nothing left to lose. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome, a silent, intimidating space. He approached the main security desk, his heart pounding against his ribs. "I'm here to see Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice sounding thin and reedy. "At Harrison Holdings." The guard, a large man with an impassive face, looked him up and down, his gaze lingering on Liam's worn shoes. "Do you have an" "No, Liam began, fumbling in his pocket. He pulled out the small card and the brass key and placed them on the marble countertop. The guard's expression didn't change, but he picked up his phone and murmured into it. A moment later, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He hung up and looked at Liam with a new-found, almost fearful respect. "My apologies, sir. Please, go right ahead. Take the private elevator on the right. It will take you directly to the 14th floor." Liam was bewildered. The private elevator was a sleek, unmarked black door he hadn't even noticed. It slid open with a silent hiss, revealing a plush, wood-panelled interior. The ride was unnervingly fast and quiet. When the doors opened again, he was not in a hallway, but in a vast, opulent office. The entire floor was a single space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. And sitting behind a massive mahogany desk was Mr. Harrison. He was not dressed in the somber suit from the funeral. He wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit, radiating an authority that was far beyond that of a simple family lawyer. "Liam," Harrison said, standing up. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. "I was wondering when you would come." "Mr. Harrison, I don't understand," Liam stammered, gesturing around the palatial office. "What is this place? My father—" "Your father was not a facilities manager, Liam," Harrison said gently. "That was a role he played, just as your job at Apex Global has been a role for you." Harrison walked over to a large, framed photograph on the wall. It showed a younger version of his father, standing shoulder to shoulder with a younger Harrison, both of them beaming. Behind them, the Sterling Tower was under construction. "Your grandfather, Edward Sterling, started with a single hardware store. Your father, Arthur Sterling, turned it into the Sterling conglomerate, one of the largest and most diversified private holding companies in the world." Liam's mind refused to process the words. He shook his head, a dizzying sense of vertigo washing over him. "No, that's impossible. We lived in a small house. We drove an old car. My father, he fixed leaky pipes." "Your father believed that wealth was a test of character, not a measure of success," Harrison explained. "He despised the arrogance and entitlement that often came with it. He wanted you to grow up understanding the value of a hard day's work, untainted by the knowledge of what was waiting for you." He gestured for Liam to sit in one of the plush leather chairs facing the desk. "He built this entire empire from the shadows, through a complex network of trusts and shell corporations. Harrison Holdings is merely the nerve center. He lived modestly, and he wanted you to do the same. He was testing you, Liam. He wanted to see if his son had the same integrity he did." Liam sank into the chair, his legs suddenly weak. He looked at his own hands, calloused from years of unremarkable work. He thought of the spreadsheets, the inventory reports, the quiet life he had built. "Apex Global," Liam whispered, the name catching in his throat. "The company I work for is one of the conglomerate's smaller subsidiaries," Harrison finished. "One of hundreds. Your father placed you there himself in a low-level position to see how you would conduct yourself, to see if you would be diligent and honest when you thought no one of importance was watching." The revelation was staggering. A bomb that detonated in the center of his life, rearranging every memory, every belief he had ever held about himself and his family. His simple life wasn't a result of failure. It had been a carefully constructed test, a trial he had unknowingly passed. "And now?" Liam asked, his voice hoarse. "What happens now?" Harrison walked back to his desk and picked up a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it gently in front of Liam. "Now you take your rightful place," Harrison said, his voice resonating with gravity. "Your father's will is unequivocal. You, Liam Sterling, are the sole heir and owner of the entire Sterling conglomerate, with an estimated net worth, as of this morning, of $91 billion. Liam stared at the number, a string of zeros that seemed to mock the very concept of reality. He thought of the cash Chloe had thrown at his feet. It was less than dust. It was nothing. I own Apex Global, he asked, the specific, personal connection suddenly crystallizing in his mind. You own the building it's in, the land it's on, and every paperclip in its supply closets, Harrison confirmed. Every employee, from the CEO down to the janitorial staff, works for you. A new piece of the puzzle slotted into place, sharp and painful. Mark, Liam said, the name tasting like ash. Chloe's new husband. He's an executive at Apex. Harrison's expression hardened. Mark Renshaw, Vice President of Business Development. Yes, we are very familiar with Mr. Renshaw. He is, as your ex-wife so publicly claims, a rising star. He is also on the shortlist to become the new head of the European Expansion Division. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. Chloe had attached herself to a man she thought was a titan of industry, a man of power, when in reality he was just an employee in a company owned by the husband she'd discarded as worthless. Mark's entire career, his future, his very livelihood, rested in the palm of Liam's hand. A cold, quiet calm began to settle over Liam, displacing the shock. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. It looked different now, not a place where he was a tiny, insignificant cog, but a kingdom he hadn't known he ruled. He thought of the funeral, the humiliation, Chloe's cruel, triumphant smile, the scattered bills on the chapel floor, the taunting messages, the public parade of her new, superior life. For weeks he had been a victim, drowning in his own powerlessness, but the ground had not fallen out from under him. It had risen up to meet him. He turned back to Harrison, the flicker of curiosity from the night before, now forged into a core of pure, unyielding steel. The sleeping giant inside him was beginning to stir. This promotion for Mark Renshaw, Liam said, his voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was steady and dangerously quiet. Tell me about it. Harrison allowed himself a small, grim smile. It is contingent on the success of his latest project, the Helios Initiative. He claims it will revolutionize our market share in Asia. The final review and approval are set for the annual strategic meeting in 2 weeks. And who gives the final approval? Liam asked, though he already knew the answer. The final sign-off comes from the ownership group, Harrison said, his eyes gleaming. It comes from you. Liam leaned back in the chair, the soft leather creaking like an old church door. He finally understood the weight of the key in his pocket. It wasn't just a key to an office, it was a key to a reckoning. Mr. Harrison, Liam said, his voice now the voice of a chairman, a ruler, cancel my sick day, I have a plan, and I'm going to need your help. The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in quiet transformation. Liam spent every day after his shift at Apex Global in the silent, commanding luxury of the Sterling Tower's 14th floor. He absorbed decades of corporate history, financial reports, and strategic overviews. He was a quick study. The same meticulous, detail-oriented mind that made him a good logistics manager made him a terrifyingly effective corporate overlord. He saw patterns in the data, connections that others had missed. Harrison acted as his guide, his loyal vizier. He explained the intricate legal and financial structures his father had built, not just to hide his wealth, but to protect it and wield it with surgical precision. Your father believed in accountability above all else, Harrison explained one evening, pointing to a complex flowchart on a massive screen. The entire system is designed to identify and expose weakness, fraud, and incompetence. And at the center of their focus was Mark Renshaw, At Liam's direction, Harrison initiated a deep-level, clandestine audit of Mark's entire department, specifically the Helios Initiative. A team of forensic accountants, the best in the world, was unleashed. They worked silently, digitally, like ghosts in the machine. What they found was worse than Liam had imagined. Mark's career was not built on genius, it was built on lies. The Helios Initiative was a house of cards. He had falsified reports, inflated profit projections, and cooked the books to make himself look like a visionary. In reality, the project was a financial black hole, hemorrhaging money, while Mark siphoned off funds for consulting fees paid to a shell corporation he owned. He was not just incompetent, he was a criminal. He's been embezzling for years on a small scale, Harrison reported, his face grim. This promotion was meant to be his big score. Control of the European division would have given him access to a budget 10 times the size. He would have bled the company dry. Liam listened, his expression unreadable. Each new piece of evidence was another stone laid on the path to his revenge. It was no longer just about personal betrayal. It was about protecting his father's legacy from a parasite like Mark. He made a decision. The plan had to be perfect. It couldn't be a simple firing. That was too quick, too merciful. The humiliation had been public. The vindication had to be public as well. The annual strategic meeting, Liam said, his voice cold. You said it's broadcast to all senior executives globally. That's correct, Harrison confirmed. Over 200 of our top people will be watching. Good, Liam said. That's our stage. The strategy they devised was simple in its elegance and devastating in its execution. They would let Mark walk into the meeting believing it was his coronation. They would let him give his presentation, full of bluster and fabricated success, and then they would dismantle him piece by piece in front of his peers, his mentors, and the entire corporate world he so desperately wanted to conquer. As the day of the meeting approached, Chloe's taunts escalated. She had somehow learned that Mark's promotion was all but guaranteed. Her arrogance knew no bounds. One evening, Liam received a text. It was a photo of Chloe and Mark, dressed in formal wear, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Celebrating Mark's future as VP of Europe." He has a huge meeting tomorrow to finalize it. It's for very important people only. Maybe if you ever get promoted from the mailroom, you can watch it on a screen someday. Liam stared at the message, a slow, cold smile touching his lips for the first time in months. "Oh, I'll be there, Chloe," he whispered to the empty room. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Then came the final, perfect twist. The ultimate act of hubris that would seal her fate alongside Mark's. The night before the meeting, Chloe called him. It was the first time she had spoken to him directly since the funeral. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with condescension. "Liam, darling," she began, "I have the most wonderful news. Mark has arranged for me to attend the big meeting with him tomorrow. As his guest of honor, of course. I get to sit in the front row and watch him become one of the most powerful men in the company." Liam remained silent, letting her savor her moment. "I just wanted to call and share the excitement," she continued, her voice practically purring. "It must be so hard for you, stuck in that dead-end job, to know that I've moved on to someone so successful, so important. I do hope you're not too bitter." "I'm happy for you, Chloe," Liam said, his voice a perfect mask of resigned sadness. Her laughter was like shattering glass. "Oh, you're always so pathetic. Anyway, I just thought you should know. When you're sorting packages tomorrow, you can think of me, sitting in the executive boardroom, breathing the air of success. It's a world you will never, ever know." She hung up. Liam slowly placed his phone down. He looked at his reflection, in the dark screen. The face staring back was no longer that of a victim. It was the face of a predator who had just watched his prey gleefully walk into a perfectly laid trap. Her presence at the meeting wasn't a complication. It was the final, beautiful, poetic piece of his masterpiece of revenge. She wasn't just going to hear about Mark's downfall, she was going to have a front row seat. The morning of the meeting, Liam did not go to the Sterling Tower. Instead, he went to the Apex Global building just as he did every other day. But he didn't go to his desk in the logistics department. He went down to the sub-basement, to the facilities management office. He greeted the head janitor, a man named George, whom he had befriended over the years. "George," Liam said with a friendly smile, "I need a favor, a big one." An hour later, as executives in $1,000 suits began to file into the main executive boardroom on the 40th floor, Liam entered through a service door at the back. He was invisible. He wore a grey janitor's uniform several sizes too big. On his head was a simple baseball cap pulled down low. He carried a mop and a yellow bucket filled with water. He positioned himself in a dark corner at the back of the room, behind a large potted plant, and began to slowly mop a small, clean patch of floor. The room buzzed with anticipation. It was a state-of-the-art amphitheater with tiered seating facing a massive presentation screen. In the front row, radiating smug triumph, sat Chloe. She was dressed in a vibrant red dress, a beacon of arrogance. Beside her, Mark Renshaw looked like a king holding court. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, and preened under the attention. Chloe scanned the room, her eyes hungry for validation. Her gaze swept past the back corner, and for a second she paused. She squinted. A slow, malicious grin spread across her face. She had spotted him. She leaned over and whispered something in Mark's ear. He glanced towards the back, a look of disbelief followed by a cruel, dismissive laugh. He shook his head and turned back to his conversation. Chloe, however, couldn't resist. She pulled out her phone, angled it discreetly, and took a picture of Liam in his janitor's uniform. A moment later, Liam's phone vibrated silently in his pocket. He didn't need to look. He knew what it was, another trophy for her collection of his failures. Her smirk was his cue. The show was about to begin. At precisely 10 a.m., the lights in the boardroom dimmed. The CEO of Apex Global, a man named Charles Worthington, stepped up to the podium. He was a capable but ultimately powerless figurehead. He answered to Harrison, and Harrison answered to Liam. "Good morning, everyone," Worthington began. "Welcome to the 2023 Annual Strategic Review. We have a lot to cover, but first, I want to hand things over to a special guest. Please welcome the CEO of our parent company, Harrison Holdings, Mr. Harrison." A ripple of surprise went through the room. It was unusual for the head of the holding company to attend a subsidiary meeting in person. Harrison walked to the podium with a gravitas that commanded immediate silence. He was the picture of old-world power. "Thank you, Charles," Harrison said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. "I am here today because the ownership group has taken a direct and personal interest in the performance of this division. We have ordered a surprise audit, the results of which we will be reviewing today." A nervous murmur spread through the audience. Mark, however, still looked confident. He believed his fabricated numbers were untouchable. He gave Chloe a reassuring wink. "But before we get to that," Harrison continued, "we have a presentation on the Helios initiative from the man who has staked his future on its success, Mr. Mark Renshaw." Mark strode to the stage, his chest puffed out. He launched into his presentation, a symphony of corporate buzzwords and dazzling, baseless projections. He spoke of synergy, disruption, and paradigm shifts, The giant screen behind him displayed colourful graphs that soared ever upward, promising astronomical profits. Liam watched from the shadows, the rhythmic slosh of the water in his bucket the only sound in his corner of the room. He watched Chloe, who was gazing at Mark with pure adoration. She was mesmerized, completely captivated by the illusion of power. Mark finished his presentation with a flourish. And so, with the launch of the Helios initiative, he concluded, we are not just entering a new market, we are creating a new future for Apex Global. Polite applause filled the room. Mark took a bow, his smile wide and triumphant. He had done it. The vice presidency was his. He turned expectantly to Harrison, waiting for the confirmation, the public anointment. Harrison did not smile. He simply nodded to a technician. Thank you, Mr. Renshaw. Now for the audit results. The screen behind Mark flickered. His beautiful, soaring graphs vanished. They were replaced by a stark black and white spreadsheet. The title at the top read, Forensic Audit, Helios Initiative, Summary of Financial Discrepancies. Mark's smile faltered. His face went pale. Our auditors have uncovered some irregularities, Harrison said, his voice as cold as a morgue slab. In fact, irregularities is too gentle a word. What we have found is a multi-year pattern of systemic fraud. The screen changed, now displaying internal emails, bank statements, and wire transfers. All of them bore Mark's digital signature. We have found falsified performance metrics, Harrison narrated, his voice a hammer striking a nail with each word. Inflated revenue projections and, most significantly, embezzlement to the tune of $4.7 million funneled through a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The name of the shell corporation appeared on the screen, Renshaw Creative Solutions. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. All eyes darted from the screen to Mark, who now looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He was sweating, his confident posture collapsing in on itself. This is a mistake, Mark stammered, his voice cracking. This is fabricated. It's a lie. In the front row, Chloe's adoring smile had been replaced by a mask of confusion and horror. She looked from Mark to the screen and back again, her mind unable to reconcile the two images, the hero and the thief. The evidence is irrefutable, Mr. Renshaw, Harrison stated flatly. It has already been verified by a third-party firm and submitted to the proper authorities. At that moment, two large, grim-faced security guards quietly entered the boardroom and took up positions near the stage. The trap had been sprung. Harrison let the silence hang in the air for a long, brutal moment. He surveyed the stunned faces in the crowd. The question is, how did this go undetected for so long? He mused aloud. The answer is that someone very high up wanted it to. They allowed Mr. Renshaw to continue to build his web of lies, waiting for the perfect moment to expose him. Harrison paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The person responsible for initiating this audit, the man who uncovered this staggering betrayal of trust, is in fact with us in this room today. Every head in the room turned, looking around, searching for some powerful, unknown figure. He is the one who ordered this investigation from the very top, Harrison continued, his voice building to a crescendo. He is the man to whom every single person in this company, myself included, ultimately answers. He is the silent owner of Apex Global and the sole chairman of the entire Sterling conglomerate. Harrison raised his hand and pointed, not to the front row, not to some visiting dignitary, but to the dark, forgotten corner at the very back of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to your chairman, Mr. Liam Sterling. In the suffocating silence, a single sharp noise echoed through the boardroom. Clatter. Liam let the mop fall from his hands. It hit the polished floor with a sound that seemed to thunder in the dead quiet. Slowly he straightened up. He took off the baseball cap, running a hand through his hair. He began to walk from the shadows into the light. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. The janitor. The ghost. He walked down the central aisle, his work boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the carpet. The sea of executives parted before him as if he were a biblical prophet. He passed Chloe's row. Her face was a grotesque canvas of disbelief and dawning, abject terror. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Her perfectly made-up face had gone slack with shock. The world she had so carefully constructed had just been obliterated by a ghost from her past, a ghost who was supposed to be sorting mail in the basement. Mark was sputtering, his face a blotchy red. He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. That's impossible. That's Liam. He's a nobody. He's my wife's pathetic ex-husband. The words hung in the air, a final, desperate, damning confession. Liam didn't stop. He walked all the way to the stage, climbed the few steps and stood beside Harrison. He took the microphone from his hand. The two men, the loyal vizier and the returned king, exchanged a brief, knowing glance. Liam turned to face the room, to face Mark, to face Chloe. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud. It was quiet, measured, and carried the weight of a billion-dollar empire. It cut through the atmosphere like a blade. "Hello, Mark," he said calmly. "We've never been formally introduced. I'm Liam Sterling." He then turned his gaze to the front row, locking eyes with Chloe. The blood had drained from her face. She looked like she was seeing an apparition. "You spent 5 years of our marriage, Chloe," he began, his voice resonating through the room's powerful sound system, "treating me like dirt under your shoe. You told me I was worthless. You mocked my job, my family, my life. You believed my worth was measured by a paycheck I let you spend so you could pretend to be someone you weren't." Chloe finally found her voice. It was a strangled, high-pitched shriek. "Liam, what is this? What are you doing? This is a joke." She tried to stand, to rush the stage, but one of the security guards put a firm hand on her shoulder, pressing her back into her seat. She was a prisoner in her own front-row spectacle. Liam ignored her outburst. He turned his attention back to Mark, who was now being flanked by the security guards. "And you," Liam said, his voice dropping, becoming colder. "You built your entire career on a foundation of lies. You felt so powerful, so important. Climbing the ladder in my company, you were sleeping in my ex-wife's bed, living a life funded by money you stole from me, all while thinking I was beneath your notice." He took a step forward, his eyes boring into Mark's. "You have no idea how long I've watched you, how long my father watched you. He knew what you were. He left your file on my desk as a test." Liam then looked back at Chloe, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes, quickly extinguished. "You brought him here today to mock me," he said, the finality in his tone sealing their fate. "You took a picture of me mopping the floor, didn't you, Chloe, to send to your friends, to laugh about the janitor who used to be your husband." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You thought you were bringing your new prize to a celebration of his success, but you just brought him to his execution." Liam's gaze shifted from Chloe's horrified face to the head of security. His voice was now pure command. "Escort Mr. Renshaw from my building. The police are waiting for him in the lobby. He is to be charged with fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage." The guards grabbed Mark's arms. He began to struggle, yelling, "No, you can't do this! Chloe, do something!" But Chloe was catatonic, her mind shattered. Liam wasn't finished. "And her," he said, pointing a single definitive finger at Chloe. "Get her out of my sight! She is trespassing on private property." The second guard moved towards Chloe. She began to scream, a wild animal sound of pure desperation and loss. "Liam, no, please, I didn't know, I'm sorry." "Please, don't do this." Her pleas for mercy were pathetic and hollow. They were the desperate cries of someone who had never shown an ounce of mercy to anyone else. As the guards dragged them both out of the boardroom, a screaming, hysterical woman and a sputtering, defeated criminal, Liam stood on the stage, silent and resolute. He watched them go, his face a mask of cold, hard justice. The room was utterly silent. 200 of the company's most powerful executives stared at him with a mixture of awe and terror. They had just witnessed a corporate coup and a personal reckoning of biblical proportions. Liam turned back to the audience. He was no longer the janitor. He was no longer the pathetic ex-husband. He was Liam Sterling, chairman of the board, and his reign had just begun. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Mark Renshaw was charged with multiple felonies. The evidence Liam and Harrison had compiled was so overwhelming that he had no choice but to plead guilty. The judge, citing the scale and audacity of the fraud, sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. His rising star had crashed to earth in a spectacular fireball of disgrace. Chloe's world imploded. The news of the dramatic confrontation at Apex Global spread like wildfire through the elite social circles she had fought so desperately to inhabit. She was no longer the glamorous wife of a star executive. She was the screeching, cast-off ex of the secret billionaire she had scorned. She became a pariah overnight. Her legal troubles were just beginning. Harrison's legal team filed a civil suit against her, proving that the lavish lifestyle she had been flaunting with Mark was funded entirely by the money he had embezzled from Liam's company. The courts agreed. The expensive condo, the sports car, the designer clothes, the jewelry, it was all seized as proceeds of crime. The divorce settlement she had bragged about was nullified. The money she had thrown at Liam's feet at the funeral was, ironically, the only cash she had left. She was evicted, bankrupted, and publicly humiliated. Her mother, Eleanor, suffered a social collapse of her own, shunned by the very people whose approval she craved. The last anyone heard, Chloe was working 2 low-wage jobs to afford a tiny apartment in the same unfashionable part of town she had once so cruelly mocked. She had become the very thing she had always feared, invisible, unimportant, and poor. Her worst nightmare, a life like the one she thought Liam had, became her reality. Liam, however, did not transform into the flashy, extravagant billionaire everyone expected. The immense wealth was a tool, not an identity. He moved out of his small apartment, but not into a sprawling mansion. He bought a comfortable, understated house in a quiet neighborhood, not far from where he grew up. He took his role as chairman seriously. Guided by Harrison, he began a quiet revolution within the Sterling conglomerate. He implemented new, radical policies focused on employee welfare, ethical sourcing, and environmental responsibility. He dismantled the cutthroat culture that had allowed men like Mark to thrive, replacing it with one built on integrity and mutual respect. He used his father's fortune not for yachts and private jets, but to honor his father's true values. He established the Arthur Sterling Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to funding vocational training centers and scholarships for underprivileged youth. It was designed to give others the same thing his father had given him, a belief in the dignity of hard work. He rarely visited the executive floors of his own companies. He preferred to walk the factory floors, the warehouses, and the logistics depots. He spoke to the workers, learned their names, and listened to their ideas. He was a leader, not a ruler, a presence felt not through fear, but through a quiet, profound respect that he earned every day. Several months after the confrontation, Liam was walking through a city park on a crisp autumn afternoon. He had shed the weight of his past. The anger and the need for revenge had been purged, leaving behind a sense of calm purpose. He sat on a bench watching children play on a nearby swing set. He was just a man in a simple jacket, enjoying a moment of peace. A woman sat down on the other end of the bench, placing a tote bag full of books beside her. She had a kind, open face and a warm smile. She was a schoolteacher, she told him, on her lunch break. They started talking, not about business or wealth or status, but about books and the changing colors of the leaves and the simple joy of a sunny day. For the first time in years, Liam found himself smiling a genuine, unburdened smile. Her name was Sarah. There was no mention of his fortune, no hint of the power he wielded. To her, he was just Liam. A kind, quiet man with thoughtful eyes. It was a new beginning, built not on a grand revelation or a dramatic confrontation, but on a simple, honest, human connection. As he sat there talking to this kind stranger, he finally understood the entirety of his father's lesson. True wealth was never about the numbers in a bank account. It wasn't measured in stock prices or corporate assets. It was measured in character. It was about who you were when you had nothing, and more importantly, who you chose to be when you had everything. Liam had been the most powerful man in that boardroom long before anyone knew his name, not because of the billions he secretly possessed, but because of the integrity he had refused to surrender. In the end, Chloe and Mark had lost everything because they had nothing of real value to begin with. Their power was an illusion, their status a costume. Liam's victory was not the destruction of his enemies. It was the quiet, confident rebuilding of his own life on a foundation of honor, purpose, and peace. He had taken his father's true legacy and proven himself worthy of it, not by conquering the world, but by quietly choosing to make it a better place. And that was the only victory that truly mattered